Many thanks for your kind invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you, especially with the students of Abdullah University, because we had our session in the morning. It was a very valuable interaction for me, but also this is very valuable for me because, yes, I have a story to tell. I am going to give you my perspective on foreign policy issues, but it's also good to know your perspective, because that's also how I enrich my own interpretation. And since I'm not an academic, I don't get I don't have the same opportunity as some other people in this room who have this daily experience of interacting with a younger crowd. So it's always good for me to take advantage of this, and therefore really many thanks for your kind invitation. What I intend to do today is to share my thoughts about the direction of Turkish foreign policy. But before I do that, let me first try to outline how I see the global evolution, because obviously Turkish foreign policy is not constructed in a vacuum. It reacts to things around Turkey, to global developments. Sometimes it's reactive, sometimes it's proactive, but nonetheless it's very much influenced by these global dynamics. And as people that think about foreign policy, we also put emphasis on understanding the world around us, because it is our understanding and our own conceptualization of these dynamics that ultimately end up influencing how we view our own set of policies and what we need to do in this dangerous and volatile world. So I'll start with, my assessment about what these global dynamics are, what this evolution has been in recent years, and talk to you about, Turkey's own specific challenges, perhaps in the second part of my speech, and then we can have a Q&A after that, and I would very much welcome both your assessments, your evaluations, your perspective, but also if you have questions about what I've said until then. So let me start by basically postulating that in recent years, and this really I'm going to go back a little bit compared to what you personally lived through, but especially the people that sit on the first row, including myself, we experienced those years. Namely, for us, there has been, one critical watershed moment, and that was the end of the Cold War, 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and a shift from the previous bipolar world system, where you had an alliance, NATO, led by the United States, that strived for influence and security against an alliance led by the Soviet Union. That whole post-Second World War order collapsed in 1989. And then this new era, I would say quite optimistically, came about. And there is perhaps one slogan, and I'm going to ask you that slogan. There is one slogan that surfaced during those years which sets out, which specifies that optimism of the thesis that democracy won against communism, that the future will be, a gradual improvement in fundamental rights, that democratic norms will become the dominant game plan, that all countries will turn to democracy and market economy. What was that slogan? Yes, thank you. Who was that? Yes, end of history. All of this optimism of, the end of the Cold War was encapsulated in that slogan, end of history. The Fukuyama thesis, which essentially said that, the democratic camp had won and communism had lost, and from there on, the world is going to turn into democracies and liberal economies. And this was the unipolar moment where, as the leader of the democratic camp, the United States became almost the hegemon of the world system, with no real competition because the Soviet Union had collapsed. So the early 90s, really, with almost a democratic transition even in Russia during Yeltsin's time, before Putin, exemplified that stretch of time of democracies gaining ground. And then gradually, and in a way, in an accelerated way after 9/11, we started to see a different sort of world dynamic. So that optimism was with us for a decade, more or less, from 1989 or 1990 till 2001. After that, we started to see a different dynamic emerging. The US war against terror, intervention in Iraq, and all the consequences that led us through, the early part of this century. And today, we are now at this year, and you will remember this. Maybe some of you don't remember 1989 for understandable reasons, but this year you will remember. This year, the 24th of February, 2022, is a turning point for world history. This period of, the end of history has come to an end, if you accept the tautology. This is the end of history. Why? Because all those assumptions that peace will prevail, that democracies will gain ground, that assumption has collapsed. It has collapsed with the war in the center of Europe. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. There is now a war that very near us. And that was something very difficult to conceptualize. How, such a war, such a radical, violent war, could still happen in the midst of Europe in the 21st century. If you had asked us this question, back in the 1990s or 2000s, yes, there was the wars in Yugoslavia, the dismantling of Yugoslavia, but nonetheless, after that period, the general view was that no, we will not have any more wars in Europe. And now we have. And this is leading to a very different world, or at least how we conceptualize the world order now is changing. The new world order, which is still emerging, but it has fundamentally emerging out of the ashes of the war in Ukraine, is one where increasingly there is a polarization between two camps, to be a bit superficial again. So a new Cold War. A new Cold War where on the one hand you have countries that have chosen democracy as their dominant social and political model. Some are more advanced, some are less advanced, some are better, some are less better, but nonetheless they all believe that their social model, their social contract, and their political governance should be steered in line with the principles of democratic norms. And the other camp is the countries that basically say the opposite, that their model of political governance is not democracy, but it's essentially authoritarian systems. And there you have two big countries, Russia and China, which are part of this other camp. So today, the dynamics of this world order are essentially shaped by this understanding that the world has moved in this direction of big power competition and essentially competition between two systems of governance, a democratic system of governance and a non-democratic system of governance. And this understanding now shapes many of the policies that are being put into place. It shapes political approaches, it shapes economic approaches, it shapes trade, it shapes investment, it shapes financial flows, it shapes sanctions policies, it shapes a lot of the type of external policies that we see around us. One example, for instance, to understand how this, and I'll come to Turkey after that, but to understand how this evolution is taking place, is the term globalization. This is a term which, where it initially emerged, many of us were, starting to use this term quite frequently. And there was a joke within our circles that every paper that was being written in those times started with "in this age of globalization," and then you could say whatever you wanted after that. Anyway, that understanding of globalization is based on the belief that globalization, whatever you want to define it, is essentially driven by an expectation from the main economic actors, multinational companies and so on, to achieve economic efficiency. It's driven by this quest for economic efficiency. So companies go out and invest in China. Why? Because that's where they find the best answer to their quest for economic efficiency. Production costs are low, they can get their sources of supply, and they can export to world markets, so they go to China. Plus, China has a huge internal market. So in a nutshell, this is what drove globalization. Trade, China became a dominant trade actor, it became a dominant actor in terms of capturing investment, and so on. That understanding of globalization is also changing now. So that globalization, the way that we got accustomed to it, came part and parcel of this view of the end of history. It was part of the understanding that the liberal market economy would gain ground everywhere else, and globalization would fuel and accelerate that transition. Today, we are looking at a different sort of globalization, where for most of these economic actors, yes, economic efficiency still matters. Obviously, they have to seek solutions to where they are going to find solutions to their, to their profit maximization, reduction of production costs. But at the same time, now another impetus, another input has become just as important. And that's how do you manage this geopolitical tension? Because now, first with COVID, now with the Russia war, and also with the tensions that are building in the relationship between US and China on Taiwan, which has other impacts, especially on trade and technology, today globalization is driven not anymore exclusively by this quest to achieve economic efficiency. It's now equally driven by this impetus to be able to build resilience against geopolitical shocks. During COVID time, it was about medical equipment. Today, it's about new technology sectors. It's about chips. It's about electric vehicles, and so on. So today's globalization is a different one. And this is where, I think, when I looked at Turkey's future, this is which also will impact our foreign policy, and which should impact our foreign policy going forward. This presents both a window of opportunity for Turkey, but also risks. Let me start with the window of opportunity. When you look at Turkey's overall economic place in the world, Turkey is very much integrated with the economic fabric of the West. 50% of our exports go to Europe. 70% of our foreign direct investment and the technology that's linked come from Europe. More than 85% of our international finance is raised from capital markets in the West, from London, New York, and Frankfurt. So this is the type of economic interdependence that Turkey has. Over the past few years, Turkey has not been successful in advancing this economic integration, essentially for political reasons. But now the big opportunity with how this world is changing, namely this separation between democracies and autocracies, and the change in how we understand globalization, which is going to be more influenced by the search for resilience against geopolitical shocks. The big opportunity for Turkey is that all these economic resources, which in the previous world order did flow to China, now many of them are going to look for a different place. And Turkey could be that place. Because many of these companies will not want to take exclusively the risk of putting all their resources in China where there are geopolitical risks. And we already see this geopolitical tension, as I've tried to outline a little bit, in the overall relationship with China, between the United States and China, between Europe and China. There are trade barriers that are becoming much more palpable. There are technology issues. The United States has now launched a program to essentially prohibit chips transfers to China. Then they want to do much more locally. Same with regard to Europe. They also have a CHIPS Act. So there are signs of an emerging technology and trade-driven tension between China and the West. And this is the big opportunity for Turkey. Because when you look at what this country has to offer, when you look at the world map, really from Germany all the way to China, perhaps to some extent India, Turkey is the country that offers the most diversified industrial backbone, the human resources, the know-how to be able to operate as the production hub for many of the companies that are now looking to divest from China, that are looking to have an alternative place of production which they could use not only for the Turkish domestic market, but as an export base primarily to Europe, but also beyond. So that's the big opportunity for Turkey, economically speaking. But then I'll talk about the risks. What are the risks? And here it's mostly about the internal order, but also foreign policy. The risks is that just looking at it and remaining passive is not going to be sufficient. So yes, theoretically, Turkey is in a good place, geographically, industrially, economically, from the point of view of its workforce and so on. But in order to capitalize on this potential advantage, Turkey needs to do at least three things. One, Turkey needs to make clear that its strategic orientation is unambiguous. I think the mistake of the past 10 years in Turkish foreign policy has really been to blur the perception about what Turkey's true strategic orientation is. Turkey is a NATO country. We are part of NATO. We are one of the most influential members of NATO. We are a candidate for accession to the EU, although the negotiations have stalled. We are a founding member of the Council of Europe. We have recognized the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. We are a member of Eurovision, although we decided not to participate in the song contest for the past few years. We are in UEFA, so wherever you look, Turkey is part of the institutional, the political, security, military, economic, and cultural institutional underpinnings of Europe. This is where we are. But over the past 10 years, our foreign policy has created the perception that Turkey wants to go somewhere else. Now, when you look at Turkey's place on the world map, it is very legitimate and normal that Turkey should seek to diversify its foreign relations. Turkey should have good relations with its neighborhood. Turkey should have good relations with emerging powers. Turkey should have good relations with dwindling powers, with Russia, with China, with Middle East. Turkey should do all of that. But the way that this objective has been implemented in the past 10 years has created the impression that Turkey is doing this at the detriment or as an alternative to its relations with the West. And this is the problem. Because you can't have an economic geography where you are so tied to your exports, your technology, your FDI, that's so part of the Western system, and at the same time act politically as if you're not. That creates considerable tension. And this has also been the disadvantage, both economically and politically. So if my perception of where the world is heading is correct, namely that we are seeing a new type of Cold War between democracies and the non-democracies, Turkey should make clear where it is. And we're not there today. We're not there because of a number of foreign policy errors, but we're not there also because of what I believe to be, and obviously I'm talking, as a free member of EDAM, not Abdullah Gül University, so it only ties me, but it's also because of the erosion of fundamental rights and democratic freedoms that we have seen here. So the two together this loss of direction in foreign policy, coupled with this erosion of democratic rights, has created question marks about where Turkey's strategic orientation is. This does not absolve, and it does not mean that the EU and the United States is also responsible for some of the problems that we have in the relationship. Absolutely. But fundamentally, it's about us. Fundamentally, it's about where we want Turkey to be. And I think there is much more that can be done and should be done. Because in order to be the beneficiary of this new world order, in order to capture more investment, in order to capture more technology, in order to create more employment, especially good employment for people like you that will have, an excellent level of education in this country, not abroad. In this country, this is what we need. We need that FDI. We need that technology. And that only comes if the strategic orientation of Turkey is clear. Nobody will come and invest, this high-level technology if you're not sure about where the country is going. If they think that the alliance with Russia is the future of Turkey, then we're not going to get that sort of technology or that sort of FDI. So that's why I say, yes, there is an enormous opportunity looking at us in this new world order. But the risk is we can't stay totally passive and believe that we will be the beneficiary just because the world dynamics around us are making us advantageous. We won't. We have to act. And that action means, as I said, to clarify ambiguities about where Turkey's strategic orientation is, number one. And this would mean that on the foreign policy side, we should essentially act accordingly. For instance, some of the mistakes, and I've been public about this, so for many years, the S-400 decision was a big mistake, in my view. We should not repeat these type of mistakes. And two, we need to do reforms at home. So we should clear any inconsistencies, any quandary, any ambiguity about the true nature of our own internal system. Turkey needs to be part of the democratic nations. We don't anymore, even we didn't, but I think some people may have thought that we had the luxury to be in the middle, so not be part of that, not be part of the other, but have good relations with both. That's not possible. There is no such world. Yes, there is such a world, but that's a very suboptimal world. So in order to maximize our benefits and create the type of future that you all deserve, that is the decision we have to make. We have to be clear about what we want. About democracy at home, predictable foreign policy abroad. Yes, we will continue to have problems, absolutely. Turkey's geography is such that, it's a difficult geography. And we don't see eye to eye with the United States. We don't see eye to eye with Europe. But we can manage those problems. It has to be, these problems have to be viewed as problems within a family. Every family has problems. There are ways to manage those problems. But we should not create this perception that Turkey does not see its future here, that it sees its future somewhere else, and especially in alliance with non-democratic countries. Then I'm afraid the risks will grow for us in the future. And when I talk to some of your age group, let's say, one of the things that I tell them is that it gives me a lot of discomfort when I meet, and at EDAM we have many young, bright students that come to us and talk to us about their future careers. And when I hear from them that they want to go abroad, this gives me great discomfort. Because this society has invested in you. You have had an excellent opportunity previously, but particularly here at Abdullah Gül University, and I'm sure the administration is doing its best to provide you with even more opportunities. So this, and this has been what I hear from many of other students. That's true, they recognize that, but they also say that they think there would be many more opportunities abroad because they don't see a clear future here. And I disagree with them. I think that the political class in this country also has a responsibility towards you. And they're the ones who should make it clear that the conditions for your future life here will be clear, predictable, and essentially will give you hope, optimism, and good prospects in this country. And for that, I come back to my initial assessment. This is the direction of travel of the world, and for me, it's very clear what Turkey needs to do. And hopefully, we'll get to that place where many of you will want to stay here and enjoy the good prospects that you will have in this country. So this is where I want to end my, sort of intervention, and I'm open to your questions, and many thanks for hosting me and for giving me this opportunity. Yes, I hope for questions and comments. That's what I've been told before I came here, that AGU students were very engaged and they were, posing a lot of questions whenever they had the opportunity, so I expect the same standard. Yes?
If there is no question, I want to start, but I
Please.
couldn't build up my question in my mind, so I will think a little bit loudly.
Okay.
First of all, thank you, Hocam. Thank you a lot for this good constructed speech. And I actually basically and simply want to ask, what if we try to create a new axis at the center, as we are doing it in the Russia-Ukraine war? So what it could be if we manage it in the center, like we like to call it as active neutrality.
I don't think there is a center. That's my problem with that argument. I think these dynamics around us are increasingly pushing us to choose. And actually, we have chosen. It's not that we need to re-choose. We are already part of, the Western system with all its institutions, our economy. Everything is, is there already. So I think it is naive to think that there is an alternative option. To me, there isn't an alternative option. What Turkey has done in Russia-Ukraine is good, skillful diplomacy. But you can't extrapolate a nationwide strategy from that. Because you have to believe that there is an alternative about, Turkey's place in the world. For me, there is no alternative. Turkey needs to strengthen its relations with the West and have good relations with the rest of the world. But Turkey cannot have the luxury of being treated as a non-democratic nation. That is, for me, it does not give the type of prospects that you all deserve. So in that sense, there is no alternative. Of course, there are alternatives. Turkey might choose a different path. But I don't think that would be optimal. So, because when you look at what other options, for Turkey's welfare, for Turkey's economy, Turkey could replace if it not have the present state of relations with Europe and the United States and more generally the West, Russia has very little to offer. Russia is a commodity-based economy. It has no technology to export except in few military domains. China, possibly, but the Turkey-China relationship is problematic and will remain problematic because of the Uyghur question. So China has always, and Turkey looks at China suspiciously, and China looks at Turkey suspiciously. So if you take away China and Russia from the equation in terms of what is it that they can provide to Turkey as an alternative to the West, there is very little left. Yes, Turkey can have good relations with Africa, with the Middle East, but they're not a nature to replace all these deep links of security, technology, trade, finance. So that's why there is no center. Perhaps before there were more opportunities, but as the world is moving in this direction of a more bipolar structure between democracies and non-democracies, Turkey will be asked to choose. And I think having good relations with both is going to be very difficult in the future years.
Thank you, hocam.
So, thank you for your speech, first of all. In your speech, you said something that I think very interesting, and I want you to express your ideas more on that topic. You said there is a cold war between democracies and non-democracies, and you said Turkey should pick a side and act accordingly. I want you to hear your ideas about the war between Russia and Ukraine in the context of this Cold War. I mean, in the Cold War between Soviet Union and United States, the Soviets never was in war. Like there was some Soviets was never in war as a war in bigger context. There were some proxy wars, but in this context, in the context of this Cold War between democracy and non-democracies, how do you view the war between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, it's also a proxy war in the sense that Ukraine is not NATO. So Ukraine does not benefit from the security guarantees of being a NATO member. So in a way, it's also a proxy war where the West supports Ukraine but is not directly involved. It provides arms, it provides training, it provides political support, but the West does not fight the war in any way. It's Ukraine that fights the war. So in that sense, it's closer to a proxy war than a real war between, Russia and the West. And hopefully we'll never get there because, that would be, very worrisome. And at some point there was discussion about whether Russia could use WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, or even nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which could indeed trigger a more direct confrontation between the West and Russia. So far that has not happened, luckily, but I don't think that the risks are totally zero. That, in the future, if Russia loses more territory, which is the likely outcome, then, they might think that they should use nuclear weapons to stop Ukraine from gaining ground militarily. So that scenario cannot be totally averted. But today, fortunately, we're not there. This is not a war between Russia and the West.
Can I make a little
yeah,
comment?
Of course.
So when you said democracy, because there's a concept like democratic countries don't fight with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So when you said democracies, did you mean the democracy as the powers of West, or democracy as a concept? Because
democracy as a concept, it's not a geographic. You have South Africa, you have Japan, that are part of the same group of nations.
Okay.
So democracy as a concept, as a conscious decision reflected in the social contract of those countries that the mode of governance should be democracy and not authoritarianism, wherever they are in the world. No more questions. I came all the way from Istanbul.
I have one. Firstly, welcome to our university. I would like to ask an additional question to my friend, active neutrality. How do you evaluate Turkish foreign policy while in the Second World War? Like we were talking with all the sides, Germany, we were going to England, and Russia. Like, how do you perceive that time? We were we didn't choose any sides, and I think we were successful at that time. How do you perceive that? Thank you.
Yes, I agree. But, you know, we were forced to choose sides after the end of the Second World War. The world has changed, and now it's changing again. So I think we have to adapt ourselves to the world around us. The Second World War, I think İsmet İnönü's diplomacy was successful. It saved Turkey from being destroyed in a very tragic war. But then just after the World War, we had to choose sides because we realized that the Soviet Union had territorial claims on Turkey. And as a result, the administration in 1952 decided to join NATO to protect itself against the threat of the Soviet Union. So then we chose sides. Now, after 1989, this imperative of choosing sides was somewhat decreased. For some countries, it was very clear. It was called the peace dividend. For us, it was a bit less clear, but nonetheless, there was no more Soviet threat. So we didn't, on security grounds, perhaps force the same way to choose sides. But today, that pressure is re-emerging. Not so much because of an ideologically driven prospect of polarization. Today, this new Cold War is not ideology driven. Before it was ideology driven. It was communism versus capitalism. Today, it's not ideology driven, but it is politically driven. It's driven by your allegiance to democracy or your allegiance to non-democracy. And that's what's going to put countries like us in a position where choosing sides will be almost forced upon us. But again, I want to add that already Turkey chose its side since 1923, and especially since after the Second World War. So it's not a matter of even choosing sides for us. It's a matter of implementing a smarter foreign policy that would allow us to maximize the benefits of being aligned and interdependent politically, security, economically, culturally with the West, while at the same time allowing us to diversify and deepen our relations with the other actors of the world. We can do both, but we have to do it in a smarter way that does not raise question about where we are strategically, morally, and democratically. Yes, let's have some gender balance. Olmadı.
Geliyor mu?
Geliyor.
Thank you for speaking. I want to ask some...
Can I have your name and your field of study?
Ebrar Taş'tan. I am in political science and international relationship. While we are speaking, you said Turkey has not well relationship with China because of Uyghurs. I wonder your opinion about Uyghurs, if is it good in the future, and it should have been better.
What is good or what should be better?
Relationship between China.
Between Turkey and China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the future, how will it?
Yeah. Well, I think that this obstacle of the Russian policy of repression against Uyghurs is a big impediment to Turkey's relationship with China, and it will remain so until China changes its policy, and I don't think they will in the foreseeable future. I think that Turks feel, a closeness to Uyghurs. We feel that they are part of our larger family, and therefore there will always be a popular reaction in Turkey when we see that these repressive policies against Uyghurs, which are, quite frankly, quite inhumane. So, and that is a big stumbling block, because morally Turkey will be critical of China. But from the China perspective, this criticism is also viewed as Turkey being supportive of the secessionist tendencies of the Uyghurs. Maybe some people in Turkey do that, but as a state policy we don't. But nonetheless, the criticism of China over their Uyghur policy is read in China as Turkey supporting the Uyghur cause and their, separatist agenda. And that's very difficult to balance. So I think because of the Uyghur issue, the Turkey-China relationship will be impeded even in the foreseeable future. And rebuilding trust is very difficult with China because of that.
Is this working? Oh, yeah, it is.
Yes.
Okay, I want to ask the next question. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ahmed. I am from Political Science and International Relations, 3rd or 4th year.
Third or fourth?
3rd or
Wow.
4th year.
It's like...
That's because I have extra courses. Yeah,
Okay.
so my point system. So anyways, I want to ask, you said something about China not being fit for foreign industries, for foreign factories. So does this mean that the West should put its factories and whatnot in Turkey? In that case, wouldn't it be just sweatshops? Wouldn't Turkish citizens have to work more than regularly? Citizens of Turkey are already working 10 hours a day, more than the law allows, more than 8. Now it's 11 or 12 hours and the pay is even less. If not less, then no one can save these Turkish people from these low wages because more Western constraints are put on it. And there are no syndicates, worker syndicates in Turkey to help solve this. Since the 80s, 70s, 90s, they're all closed down. So by these constraints, in the end, the Turkish citizen will work for nothing and work more and get tired more and more. So why would Turkey find it interesting to turn itself into a new China sweatshop? It's a sweatshop for Westerners. This is just for certain groups of people to benefit, let's just say. So this is my first question. I also have a second.
Okay. No, very fair question. Interestingly, production in China has a much higher technology content than production in Turkey. When you look at China's export to the world, the technology part of those exports is about 5 times more than Turkey's. Turkey has a very low technology content in its exports, the lowest among the OECD. China is 5 times higher. So if you imagine a scenario of some of that investment flowing to Turkey, that means that it will be building more technology and more higher value added investment than our investments today in Turkey. So not at all a sweatshop. Actually, China has moved quite long way from those initial days of building competitive advantage on the basis of low labor-intensive industries. Those intensive have actually shifted to other countries. They've shifted to Bangladesh, they've shifted to Vietnam, because prices, unit costs, labor costs in China have gone up. So therefore, Chinese production has also gone further up the hierarchy of value added and technology. So if Turkey is able to capture some of that, that would be Turkey's advantage, not at all a sweatshop model.
I feel as if that doesn't really answer my question, because as you said, Bangladesh itself, which is a country much weaker than China, got sweatshops instead of China. Maybe the West is thinking that those sweatshops aren't working anymore in China and they should be moved to Turkey. In the end, that doesn't answer how the workers' rights will become better. Workers will keep suffering and will keep working harder and longer and for less money. And with automation and no welfare state, how would that be with all these?
Yeah, I mean, the fact of worker rights has very little to investments coming from China. It's much more about what sort of social contract we have here, what sort of development path we have here. It's really about, you know, the public policies that need to be put into place, where you build, Turkey builds its own competitive advantage on not on labor-intensive industries, but on skill-intensive industries, on talent-intensive industries, and that should be our development model. So, and worker rights, you know, should accompany this initiative. So that's a very different question to the China question. It has, you know, it has nothing to do with the China question. But on your second part of automation and workers' rights, yes, that's a big question that faces every society and to which there is no clear answer. Because indeed, when we look at the experience about labor, there are people who are technology optimists and there are people who are technology pessimists. Technology pessimists advance your argument. They say that with technology, there will be less need for labor. So how, you know, many people will find themselves unemployed, unemployment will go up, we will have very few prospects for decent jobs, automation will replace us, robots will replace us. That may be true, by the way, we don't know it yet. But then there are also the technology optimists who say, look, since the first industrial revolution, with new technologies coming online, workers found new areas of employment. Yes, their old areas of employment were destroyed, but then new areas of employment emerged. We don't exactly know what those new areas of employment shall be. But nonetheless, there is no reason to be pessimistic about where technology is taking us, because our historical experience has been, you know, with industrial revolution, with electricity, with internet, the emergence of these new opportunities. So this means that for governments, there is a responsibility to prepare your next generation to this new economic order. You have to in order to facilitate this transition, you want your young people to be adaptable to this new economy. You don't want them to only be able to work in labor-intensive industries. You want them to be able to work in analytical industries and to develop these type of skills. That's the responsibility on the public policy side.
So before I ask my second question,
Third.
Is it okay? I mean,
yeah, sure.
If anyone has any other questions, okay. Just a small comment. So it was basically about internal policies, and those will not. Just a small comment. I don't think these will be controlled by Turkey, as the governments, the big powers who will put sweatshops and industries and whatever here, and technology can easily hit Turkey economically with all this power here. It's like another colonialism. So I don't think anything could be done about those workers' rights. I'm very pessimistic about that. Anyways, to my second question, you mentioned in your your presentation that Turkey has to align with the Western democratic countries basically inferred. But the West itself has a division, in-camp division. So we see France blaming the US for the petrol, France blaming Norway for the petrol. Lots of inner Western fighting. Some countries in the West are not interested in Ukraine's situation, and some, like Serbia, will just stand with Russia. And so, with all of these, how can we say that this Western gap, in-camp gap, won't get bigger? That's my final question.
Well, we can say it because all these examples actually prove my point. That the West as a concept is a values-based system. So South Africa for me is also the West. Japan is also West. South Korea is the West, part of this. And the fact that Western countries have problems between them is very normal. And these are problems that should be settled the way that you have problems with your own family. That does not make you a non-member of the family, the fact that you have problems with your family. I hope you don't have problems with your family, but it's part of normal life. Everybody has problems in the family. So this is how I view the West. The fact that you are part of the West does not mean that you don't have problems. I mean, there were many problems. Look at when the US tried to, decided about the Iraq war. There were quite big opposition to it in Europe, particularly in France, also in Turkey. The UK moved with the US. France and Germany didn't. So this is very normal, but they're still part of the West. Why? Because fundamentally, the way that they view the future of their own society is the same. It's a value-based system. It's about democracy. It's about free market. It's about rule of law. It's about human rights. As long as you have an understanding about these fundamental values, you are going to be part of the same community of nations. It doesn't mean that you won't have problems, political problems. Of course you will have political problems. We're in a world of nation states. Every nation state has a different outlook. They have their own national interests. They don't always converge. That's the world we live in.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. My department is Electrical Electronic Engineering. I am third year student. Maybe...
Between 3 and 4.
Yes. Maybe my question is not that deep. This is not my area, I know, but I am curious about these topics.
Yeah, of course.
You said that Turkey needs an orientation for stability for future. I agree with you. As far as I see, until that time, Turkey was trying to approach to Europe in terms of policies and other diplomatical events. But even if we are trying to approach to Europe, they don't even try to approach us, as far as I see from the world. Also, you said that S-14 event was wrong step for Turkey. Let's think, we need a medicine, and there are 2 pharmacists in my neighborhood. One of them is not selling to me this medicine. What should I do? Basically, I need to go the second one. What do you think about that topic?
Okay.
Thank you.
Firstly, it's a lie that they're not selling you that medicine. They were selling you that medicine. We decided not to buy it because we said that we want to technology transfer, and they were not providing technology transfer. That's the reason why we didn't buy the Patriots. 1. 2, it wasn't between 2 pharmacies. It was between 3 pharmacies.
Maybe.
The third pharmacy was the European pharmacy. And the European offer was also on the table. So the alternative to the Patriots was not the S-400. It was the European system, which was also non-problematic because it was NATO interoperable. And we didn't favor that either. So there is no way that I can defend the S-400 decision on any grounds. Again, it is not true that that Americans were not selling us Patriots. They offered us twice. They offered us two offers, one in 2012, one in 2018. We decided not to buy it because we said rightly that they were not promising technology transfer. But then we went and bought from Russia a system with no technology transfer. So how does that make sense? To answer your question about pharmacies. On the first part of your question, you're absolutely true that the Turkey-Europe relationship is problematic, and there is a responsibility on both sides. In Europe, there is at least some people that think that Turkey should not be part of Europe because of cultural reasons, because of religious reasons. And in Turkey, we basically decided not to advance this by eroding our own fundamental rights. So we gave even more ammunition to the people in Europe who don't want Turkey in Europe. That's where we are. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I would like to, but if it doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world. Turkey can very well paint a future for itself without being an EU member. But Turkey needs to be part of the democratic family of nations. That's very different. We don't need to be part of the EU. It would be good if we are. You will all get, free travel, work, study there, and so on. It would be a better outcome for us and for Europe. But ultimately, this is not what defines Turkey. This is not how I want us to be defined either. But I want Turkey to be part of the democratic nations that has respect to fundamental freedoms, cultural rights, rule of law. That's what means, for me at least, being part of the Western family of nations, as opposed to being part of the non-democratic family of nations.
Yes, thank you. If it is okay for you,
it's absolutely
can
okay.
I ask for second question?
Sure.
As you know, if there is an event in the world, let's say about climate change or different animal rights, European unions can take quick actions. But in the world, there are lots of problems about humans, as you know, in the Syria and other parts of world. There are many terrorism things or other bad events about humanity. But for these events, the West countries cannot open their eyes, as far as I understand. What is this reason? Actually, we see many news in the evenings about the world. There are many, many bad things, but we cannot see any action like a climate change. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is also important, but in this part, the peoples are dying, actually.
Yes. Well, it's really about how governments take decisions. Governments take decisions in democratic societies always with an eye to the elections. So for a government to move, there are exceptions, but for a government to move in one direction, climate change or refugees, they have to view this as being beneficial to their electoral chances. In Europe today, there is a strong constituency that pushed the governments towards the green transition, especially youth, but not just youth, now industry. So there is overall a very strong constituency. We're starting to see some of that here, fortunately as well, that have developed a consciousness about climate. For instance, the US is more divided. During the Trump era, the US was in a very different stance. Now with the Democrats, they've also aligned themselves with the European viewpoint, and they're starting to deliver on the climate agenda. But when the Republicans were in power, the US was very different. They believed that there was no human-driven, climate problem, that this was an artificial problem, and that the United States even withdrew from the Paris Agreement. So for a lot of these refugees, the same. So it's about whether governments view the initiatives that need to be taken as being beneficial to their electoral chances. Climate is, so governments move on climate in Europe. On refugees, they don't see it as being beneficial to their electoral chances. On the contrary, on refugees, they view protectionism, building walls, as being more beneficial to their electoral chances. Because society fundamentally is not ready to accept refugees in European societies. Society, on the other hand, is willing to accept costs for climate, and governments therefore move in that direction. But on refugees, they don't want to move because they think they will lose elections because society is, essentially quite unhappy if they end up with more refugees. That's how I view it.
Thank you for the answer.
But of course, I mean, this is not static. Society's preferences can change. It can change over time. It also can change through leadership. And we can hope for that.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thanks for coming to our university. My question is about East Mediterranean Sea, because we are opposite sides with West. And what do you think about our politics?
Politics where? In the East Med?
About East Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah. The East Med issue is very complicated because fundamentally it is between Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus. With Cyprus, it is a byproduct of the Cyprus problem, and it will not be solved unless the Cyprus problem is solved. So the core problem between Turkey and the Greek Cypriots is that Cyprus is divided. We don't recognize the Greek Cypriots. They don't recognize the TRNC. And this is the core of the East Med problem that relate to Cyprus, because every party has, unrecognized claims. With Greece, it's different. With Greece, it is basically an element of our many disputes, which is not limited to the East Med. There is the continental shelf. There is the territorial waters of the islands. There is the violation of the Lausanne Treaty and that obligates Greece to remain those islands in a neutral, disarmed state. There is the issue of the flight information regions with extent 10 miles instead of 6 miles, which is the core cause of these, Greek claims that Turkey violates Greece's airspace. There's the issue with regard to the Turkish minority in Greece. There's the issue about the Greek church in Istanbul. So we have many unsettled problems with Greece. And over time, the two societies have been exposed to a narrative. And this is not only but this is the most critical part to me. They've been exposed to a narrative that their claims are their rights. What we claim in the East Med is our right. It's Mavi Vatan. What Greece claims in the East Med is their right. That's both untrue. It's not our right. It's not their right. These are claims. There's a difference between claims and rights. And the only way to resolve the conflict is to accept this. That these are not rights. That they should be negotiated because there is a disagreement. And the only way forward can only be negotiations. There is no military solution to the problems between Turkey and Greece. That would be a disaster. no matter what the outcome. So we have to solve it diplomatically. And ultimately, we have to solve it by direct negotiations with Greece, and also to agree to submit some of our differences to the International Court of Justice, to The Hague. That's how we can solve these problems. But it's very difficult because for many years, even you, I suppose, have been accustomed to think that what you hear on TV is Turkey's rights. What the Greek citizens hears on TV is the right of Greece, that it is their sovereign right. It is not. This is a contested sea. Contested means there are clashing claims. Turkey claims something, Greece claims something else. And the only way to resolve this is through diplomacy. But you have to prepare your own population, your own public opinion to diplomacy. We have not. They have not. Because we are all being exposed to this as this is our right. So when you say this is our right, you can't move anymore. Because no government will concede on what is viewed as the national right. But fundamentally, it is not. Greece does not own 44,000 square kilometers of continental shelf just by virtue of a small island of Kos, of Meis. They don't. But they claim they do. And they think that's their right. It's not. But that's where the problem is.
Okay, thank you.
So, a member of Academia on Political Psychology can perhaps answer this on how we solve these problems. Huh?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I'm also a third-year student. And my question about is our young generation. As you mentioned, our generation think their future in abroad. And my question is, how can create the culture that our generation live in Turkey, not abroad, especially within these economic situations?
Very good question. This is something that I try to develop also when I talk to some of your colleagues. Turkey has had a rather difficult political trajectory. But every time that we ended up in deep problems and the older generation lived through that before us, the 1960 coup, the 1918 coup, economic collapse of the 1970s, economic collapse in early 2000, Turkey rebounded strongly. So it's really, I have a lot of confidence in the core positive dynamics of this country. Its people, its geography, its openness to the world, its industrial know-how, its workforce, its work ethic that was already raised. So when at the top, Turkey is able to address its governance problems, all of these dynamics push Turkey ahead very rapidly. That remains my belief. And that's the thing that should keep you hopeful.
So we have to believe that. We have to believe.
I mean, you have to believe in the core dynamism of this country. And then the politics, the governance, bad today, better tomorrow. That's what you need to believe. Because that's been our history, our political history. Yes, we had difficult times, but we rebounded.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the Chinaman.
Hi again. My question will be about military expenditure. We talked about new Cold War. After the war between Russia and Ukraine, we have seen that some European countries like Poland and Germany is increasing their military expenditure, like more than $100 billion. What do you think that Turkey should we do? Like we have a NATO standard, like our 2.5%. Do you think that that is enough for Turkey?
The NATO standard is 2% of the defense budget to GDP ratio. And before the war, very few NATO nations had achieved that. And there was a source of friction between the United States and Europe. After the war, things have changed. Many countries, particularly Germany, did increase their defense expenditure and committed to that level of 2% to GDP. In the Turkish case, of course, because of our geography, we were always on the high end of relative defense expenditure. We talk in relative terms, not in absolute terms, because as you said, Germany reaching 2% means 200 billion euros. That's a very big figure. But because of the threats facing Turkey, in any case, our defense expenditures were on the high end within NATO. Whether Turkey should increase its defense expenditure, I don't think so. Turkey should have other priorities. It should keep its expenditure relatively high because, yes, we do face security threats. We're not, where Portugal is. So we have to have, a defense capabilities that are needed to ensure the protection and to address the security challenges. But nonetheless, I wouldn't want Turkey to go too much in that direction because ultimately it means cutting spending from other areas. And there it's mostly about, then you lose the opportunity to invest more in education, more in health, and so on. So I think the balance should always be kept in mind. Buyurun. Maybe the last question, since we're starting to lose our audience one by one. But
we talk about like diplomacy and negotiations and coming together with the West and things like that. Now Greece, if we think in the Greece example, don't want to come close to negotiation, don't want to come close to diplomacy, and they intrude Lausanne Treaty, and they arm islands, and United States supports PKK by changing the name of the PKK, and they give free armaments to PKK, and those shoots missiles and against Turkey and uses those armaments against Turkey, and they establish a corridor in South. Okay.
Yeah. Let me answer your questions. On Greece, what we need to do is essentially adopt an attitude that Turkey wants to solve the solution through diplomacy and, if need be, through international courts. And we have to build public pressure on Greece to accept this position. But today's rhetoric is, I'm afraid, very unproductive. Turkey cannot be a country that blatantly threatens Greece with war. That's what Russia does. We can't be Russia. That's not the type of state behavior that we should adopt. So all these threats, direct threats, make us lose diplomatic partners in the world. They help the agenda of Greece to portray Turkey as violating international law, as threatening a neighbor against the principles of the UN Charter. So that's totally wrong diplomacy. We should do the exact opposite. We should advertise that Greece is violating international law, and we want to settle this through diplomacy and, if need be, through international courts. We have to repeat the same message, always repeat the same message, and build public pressure on Greece to essentially accept to talk about these issues and, if need be, go to court with Turkey. And that's why this narrative, today's narrative, is very unproductive. It undermines our own position, because in order to solve this issue, we have to protect a rules-based system. This is what we need to be in favor of. We can't be in favor of a system where neighbors attack each other. That's what Russia does. So I think we need to go back to a more mature and tactful language when dealing with the violations of Greece. With the United States, this has been of course, a behavior very unbecoming of a NATO ally. PKK is a threat to Turkey, and it is totally unacceptable for a NATO ally like the United States to give weapons to the PKK or the PKK offshoots in Syria. Now, the way to solve this problem, however, is, since we can't decide on behalf of the United States, we have to change the conditions that would make it more advantageous for the United States to work with Turkey rather than the PKK. Let's recall, and this is sometimes totally forgotten in the public discussion, let's recall how the US-PKK relationship started, PYD relationship started. We're talking about Syria. It started because Turkey was wanting to do regime change in Syria and used some of the Islamic factions in Syria to accelerate regime change. It supported elements in Syria that in order to, to fight against the Assad government. It preferred this relationship, and when the threat of ISIS emerged, Turkey did not want to confront ISIS directly. There were negotiations with the United States, but because of the very diverse fabric where some of the ISIS were previously Nusra, and Turkey had worked with Nusra, Turkey did not want to engage in that fight directly. So ultimately, the United States decided to choose the PYD to do the fight against the Islamic State. So what Turkey had done a few years thereafter, the cross-border operations in 2017, the first, had we agreed to do it in 2015, there would have been no US-PYD relationship. So let's remind that, because that's how the problem started. And I think in the future, we can solve the problem because fundamentally the US has no strategic interest in Syria. The US foreign policy thinking is much more consumed about China, about the relationship with China, about big power competition. They don't really want to be in Syria anymore. The only reason why they're in Syria, the only two reasons why they're in Syria is one, they want to make sure that the Islamic State does not become a force again, and two, they want to contain the regional influence of Iran. That's the reason why the relationship with the SDF, PYD, YPG, PKK continues. So, if it were me, I would develop policies that would provide alternatives to what the US wants to do in Syria. And already, as I said, we were doing the cross-border operations in 2017 and now perhaps a new one. Had we done that in 2015, there would be no such relationship between US and the PYD. But at the time, we were still working with some of the Islamic groups and therefore decided that even when the Islamic State attacked Kobane, Turkey stood at a distance. It did not intervene. And that was the Islamic State fighting the PYD. So we made our choice very clear in 2015. That's why the US ended up working with them. And that's part of the problem now, obviously. And that needs to change because this is totally unsustainable and it's totally unacceptable. But we have to change the US decision-making by actually talking about how some of these goals can be achieved. If it's about containing Iran, what Turkey is willing to do in Syria if it's about containing the Iranian influence, and so on. We need to have that sort of discussion. About NATO alliance, let's not forget that, yes, NATO alliance is very important, but it's not everything. In 2003, when the US wanted to stage war against Iraq, Turkey did not allow the US to use its own territory. We were a NATO ally, but we still didn't. So the NATO partnership, yes, it's important, but it's not everything. Countries can have national interests that are not solely defined by being an ally within NATO.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you for your collaboration and supportive ideas. Thank you very much. This is a close time. Rector hocam will give you a plaquette to you.
Tamam. Peki, çok teşekkürler. Sağ olun.
Rektörlüğümü takdim edeyim. Evet. Evet.